The light hitting the pillow wasn't the sterile fluorescent gray of a hotel room. It was warm, amber gold, filtering through heavy curtains that definitely didn't belong to the Hyatt Regency. For a jagged second, panic spiked. The sharp disorientation of waking up in a city you don't remember landing in. But then I breathed in. Cedar. Faint citrus. The smell of someone else's skin. The panic dissolved into something heavier, sweeter. My armor was gone. The charcoal suit, the heels, the ironclad schedule. All of it was piled on a chair across the room. I turned my head. She was there, breathing deeply in the quiet morning. 12 hours ago, she had looked at me with eyes that saw right through the blazer and the title and asked a simple question. Stay? The fear of the morning after regret should have been screaming at me. Instead, all I felt was the terrifying, intoxicating weight of being completely desired. 12 hours earlier, my headspace was a different planet. I was standing in the lobby, vibrating with a caffeine headache that felt like a drill bit behind my left eye. Third city in 5 days. My body was running on cortisol and espresso shots, a chemical cocktail that kept me upright but completely numb. I caught my reflection in the elevator doors and barely recognized the woman staring back. The suit was perfect. Italian wool, slate gray, tailored sharp enough to cut glass, but it felt like a cage. My hair was pinned back so tight my scalp ached, every strand lacquered into submission. The underwire of my bra dug into my ribs, a constant, sharp reminder of the constraints I lived in. This is the armor. You strap it on, and you become the person everyone looks to for answers. The one who navigates the merger. The one who fires the underperformer. The one who never, ever looks tired. It's the decision fatigue that actually kills you. It's not the big strategy calls. It's the 1,000 tiny micro-choices that chip away at your sanity. Morgan, where do we sign? Morgan, the client is stalling. Morgan, what's the move? By 9 p.m., my brain felt like a browser with 50 tabs open, half of them frozen. I needed a drink. I needed to decompress. But the thought of walking into the hotel bar made my stomach turn. I knew exactly how that script played out. I'd order a Pinot Noir, and within 5 minutes, some account executive from a mid-tier firm would slide onto the stool next to me, eyeing my badge, wanting to leverage synergies. I couldn't do it. I couldn't perform for one more second. I walked right past the lounge. The chatter spilled out, loud, performative laughter that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. I pushed through the revolving doors and hit the pavement. The night air was humid, clinging to the silk of my blouse, but it felt real. I pulled out my phone, ignoring the red notification bubble that demanded my attention, and summoned a car. I didn't type in a destination at first. I just looked at the map, searching for a blank space away from the business district. I needed anonymity. I needed a place where nobody knew my KPIs. I found a spot called the Velvet Oak. The reviews mentioned quiet music and strong pours. That was enough. The Uber was a beat-up sedan that smelled of vanilla and stale smoke, but the driver didn't talk. I leaned my head against the cool glass, watching the financial district strip away. The glass towers and neon signage gave way to brick walk-ups and dim streetlights. I felt the tension in my shoulders, that permanent knot between my blades, refused to loosen. I was still on guard. I was still calculating the flight schedule for tomorrow. I looked down at my hands. My knuckles were white, gripping my phone like a lifeline. I forced my fingers to uncurl, one by one. It was a manual override of my own nervous system. When the car pulled up to the curb, the street was empty. No doorman, no velvet rope, just a heavy wooden door with a small brass handle. The wood looked old, scarred by weather and time, promising something grounded. I paid and stepped out. The silence here was different. It wasn't the silence of an empty boardroom. It was the silence of a city exhaling. I smoothed my blazer, a reflex I couldn't stop, and reached for the door. I just wanted a drink. I just wanted to be invisible for an hour. I didn't know I was walking into the one place where my armor wouldn't work at all. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the city noise like a physical severance. The silence inside wasn't empty. It was thick, textured, a sudden drop in pressure that made my ears pop. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It didn't smell like the sterile, chemical lemon of the hotel housekeeping or the desperate, cloying perfume of a networking mixer. It smelled of history. Dark, polished mahogany, the bitter dust of old books, and a sharp, bright undertone of lemon oil and Angostura bitters. The lighting was low, amber-hued, coming from sconces that looked like they'd been burning since the 20s. It was the kind of light that forgives tired eyes, the kind that softens the edges of a hard day and blurs the sharp lines of a tailored suit into something softer, more human. I felt my shoulders drop another inch just standing in the entryway, the cool air conditioning wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I scanned the room. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't dead. The patrons were scattered like islands, a couple murmuring in a booth with their heads bent close together, an older man nursing a dark stout at the corner of the bar, a woman reading a paperback with a glass of red wine. Nobody looked up when I walked in. Nobody was scanning the room for a better conversation partner or checking to see if someone important had arrived. It was a neighborhood joint, the kind of place that exists to serve the people who live within 3 blocks, not the transients passing through on business accounts. I felt conspicuously over-tailored in my slate gray suit, a sharp, metallic object in a room made of velvet and wood, a glitch in their analog system. But nobody stared. The anonymity I craved washed over me, cool and immediate. I moved toward the bar. That's when I saw her. She was behind the counter, back turned to me, reaching for a bottle on the top shelf. Her movement caught my attention instantly, not because it was flashy, but because it was precise. There was no wasted energy. She grabbed the bottle, spun, and poured in one fluid motion, the liquid catching the amber light as it fell into the mixing glass. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't performing for tips or putting on a show for an audience. She moved with the grounded confidence of someone who owns the space she occupies, her actions dictated by a rhythm only she could hear. She wore a simple black button-down, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that looked capable, strong. Her hair was pulled back, practical, but a few loose strands framed a face that was striking in its seriousness. I chose a stool at the far end of the bar, the darkest corner, where the curve of the wood met the wall. It was the strategic choice. Back to the wall, full view of the room, maximum privacy. I slid onto the leather seat, placing my clutch on the counter with a soft thud. I expected the usual routine. The forced smile, the, "What can I get you, hun?" The performative hospitality that I was so sick of buying. It didn't happen. She finished the drink she was making, an old-fashioned by the look of the orange peel she twisted over the glass, and slid it to the man reading the newspaper. Only then did she turn her attention to me. She walked down the length of the bar, her eyes locking onto mine. They were dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of the customer service glaze I was used to. She didn't smile, not really. She just gave me a nod, a small acknowledgement of presence that felt more respectful than any grin. She set a coaster down in front of me, leather, not cardboard, and placed a glass of water on it. The glass was heavy, cut crystal, sweating slightly in the humid air. She didn't ask what I wanted immediately. She let me settle. She let me take a breath. It was a small mercy, that pause. I picked up the water, the cold condensation seeping into my fingertips, grounding me. I watched her move away to wipe down a shaker, observing the way her hands worked. Efficient, sure. I realized I was staring. In my world, staring is an aggression, a power move to assert dominance. Here, it felt like I was just trying to understand the physics of the room, and she felt like the gravity holding it all together. She turned back around, catching me watching her. She didn't look away. She walked back over, resting her hands on the edge of the bar, leaning in just slightly. The distance between us closed, not aggressively, but intimately. The air between us felt suddenly charged, static electricity building before a storm. "Rough day?" she asked. Her voice was low, a rich contralto that seemed to vibrate in the wood of the bar top. It wasn't a polite inquiry. It sounded like she actually knew the answer. "It's ongoing," I replied, my voice clipping the edges of the words. I wasn't in the mood for banter. I wanted a transaction. I'll take a Vesper, and please, don't bruise the gin. It was a test. A subtle, pretentious little gauntlet thrown down to see if she knew her classics, if she could handle a drink that required balance. It was also a way to reassert the hierarchy. I order, you pour. Iris didn't move. She didn't reach for the gin. She just rested her elbows on the bar, crossing her arms, and looked at me with a tilted head. No, she said. I blinked. The word was foreign in my current ecosystem. Excuse me? You don't want a Vesper, she said calmly, as if stating the weather. It's too boozy. You're dehydrated. I can see the lines around your eyes. And you haven't eaten dinner yet. A Vesper on an empty stomach with your level of exhaustion? You'll be sick in 20 minutes. I'm not doing that to you. I felt the heat rise up my neck. It was the specific indignation of a woman used to being the smartest person in the room, being told she's wrong. I opened my mouth to argue, to pull rank, to remind her that the customer is always right, but she cut me off. Not with words, but with a look. Her eyes dropped to my hands, still clenched around the water glass. Look at your knuckles, she said softly. You're holding that glass like it's the only thing keeping you tethered to the floor. Your shoulders are practically touching your earrings. You don't need a drink that fights you. You need one that helps you let go. She pushed off the bar before I could formulate a rebuttal, turning her back to grab a bottle of Amaro. I'm making you a paper plane. Bourbon, Aperol, Amaro Nonino, lemon. It's bright, it's balanced, and it won't knock you out before you've had a chance to breathe. I sat there, stunned. I was the director of sales. I managed a team of 40 and a budget in the millions. And I had just been overruled by a bartender in a linen shirt who hadn't even asked for my name. The strange thing was, the anger didn't stick. It flared and died, replaced by something unsettlingly like relief. For the first time in 5 days, someone else was making a decision. I didn't have to calculate the outcome. I didn't have to weigh the pros and cons. I just had to sit there. She worked with a quiet rhythm, the sound of ice hitting the metal shaker distinct and sharp in the quiet room. She poured the amber liquid into a coupe glass. She slid it toward me, then leaned back against the counter, crossing her ankles. So, she said, wiping her hands on a towel, I'm not going to ask what you do because I can already tell it involves too many emails and not enough sunlight. Instead, I'm going to ask, when was the last time you slept? And I don't mean passed out from exhaustion. I mean slept. I picked up the glass. The scent was citrusy and herbal, complex but clean. I looked at her. She wasn't trying to network. She wasn't flirting, at least not in the way I was used to, the transactional, ego-stroking kind. She was just curious. She was looking at the woman inside the suit. Tuesday, I admitted. The truth slipped out before I could polish it. I think. The time zones have been blurring. Tuesday, she repeated, a low hum of sympathy in her throat. Drink. Slowly. I took a sip. It was perfect. Tart, bittersweet, with a warmth that bloomed in my chest instantly. It wasn't the harsh burn of the scotch I usually drank. It was nuanced. It tasted like care. Good? She asked. Yes, I whispered. The single syllable felt heavy. Good. She stayed there for a moment longer, her gaze lingering on my face, reading the tension map of my features. I'm Iris, by the way. Morgan, I said. Morgan. She tested the name, nodding. You're safe here, Morgan. No emails, no decisions. Just the drink. She moved away to help another customer, leaving me alone with the glass. But the space she left behind didn't feel empty anymore. As the alcohol hit my bloodstream, warm and steady, I felt the first brick of the wall crumble. My grip on the stem of the glass loosened. The noise of my internal monologue, the to-do lists, the flight times, the quarterly projections, began to quiet down, drowned out by the hum of the refrigerator and the low jazz playing in the corner. I wasn't the director anymore. I was just a woman sitting in the dark, drinking something beautiful, being watched by someone who saw too much. Time became a fluid concept, measured only by the melting ice in my glass and the slow, rhythmic rotation of the ceiling fan above. The crowd began to thin out, the islands of conversation drifting away into the humid night until only the die-hard locals remained. I sat in my corner, nursing the paper plane, and watched Iris. It was impossible not to. I have spent the last decade studying leadership dynamics, how to command a room, how to leverage silence, how to make people afraid enough to work but not afraid enough to quit. My style is architectural. I build structures of pressure and expectation. I rule by strategy. Iris, I realized, ruled by gravity. She didn't order people, she guided them. I watched her cut off a man who had clearly had too much bourbon. In my world, that is a conflict negotiation, a moment to state terms and escalate consequences. Iris just slid a glass of water in front of him, murmured something I couldn't hear but saw him nod to, and patted his shoulder. He didn't argue. He didn't bluster. He just paid his tab and left, looking strangely grateful. It was a soft power I didn't understand, authority without the sharp edge. It was terrifyingly attractive to watch someone control an environment without ever raising their voice. I was so focused on analyzing her efficiency that I forgot to monitor my own deteriorating state. The exhaustion I had been holding back behind a dam of caffeine and sheer will finally breached the perimeter. My hand, resting on the condensation-slicked coaster, simply gave up. It was a microscopic failure of motor control, the kind of thing that never happens in a boardroom. My fingers went slack. The heavy crystal coupe tipped precariously on its stem, gravity seizing the opportunity to make a mess of my dignity. I didn't even have time to gasp. Iris was there. Her hand shot out across the bar, catching the bowl of the glass before a single drop of the orange liquid could hit the wood. Her reflexes were instantaneous, violent in their speed but gentle in their execution. Her fingers wrapped around the glass, and the side of her hand pressed firmly against mine. Warmth, calluses, strength. She didn't pull away immediately. She held the glass steady, her hand covering mine, pinning me to the moment. I looked up, startled, adrenaline spiking through the haze of the Amaro. "Easy," she said. Her voice wasn't mocking. It was a low rumble, intimate and grounding. "I've got you." I'm sorry, I stammered, the apology automatic. "I'm usually more coordinated. It's the Tuesday," she finished for me. She slowly righted the glass, but she didn't move her hand away completely. She let it rest on the bar top, inches from mine. "You're running on fumes, Morgan. The engine is bound to sputter eventually. I hate this city," I blurted out. It wasn't what I meant to say, but the sudden proximity to her seemed to pull the truth out of me like a magnet. It's loud, and it smells like exhaust and ambition. Everyone here is just climbing over everyone else to get to a slightly higher floor. Iris tilted her head, studying me with that unnerving, clear gaze. "That's one version of it," she conceded. "But there's another version. The one where the bakery on 4th opens at 5 in the morning and smells like yeast and vanilla. The one where the old guys play chess in the park regardless of the weather. You're just seeing the skyline, Morgan. You're not seeing the street." "I don't have time for the street," I said, picking up my drink again, carefully this time. "I live in the skyline. It's cold up there." "I know," she said softly. "That's why you came in here." She leaned forward then, resting her weight on her forearms. The bar was wide, a physical barrier of oak and brass between us, but she made it feel non-existent. She invaded my personal space, not aggressively, but with a gravitational pull that made me want to lean in to meet her. I could smell her now, not just the lemons she had been cutting, but something underneath: sandalwood, soap, skin. It was a scent that felt like home. "You think you're invisible when you're up there," Iris said, her eyes tracing the line of my jaw. "But down here, everything is close. Everything touches." I swallowed hard. The air between us grew heavy, pressurized. The background noise of the refrigerator and the distant traffic faded into a dull hum. There was only the dark wood, the amber light, and the way she was looking at me. Like I was a puzzle she had already solved, but wanted to enjoy putting together anyway. "I should go," I said, the words lacking any conviction whatsoever. "Should you?" she challenged, a faint smile playing on her lips. Before I could answer, the overhead lights flickered once, twice. The universal signal. The safety of the open sign was ending. The sanctuary was closing its gates. "Last call," she whispered, but she didn't reach for my check. She just held my gaze, waiting to see if I would run. The shuffle of the remaining patrons felt like a slow exhale. The couple in the booth untangled themselves, whispering secrets and laughter as they gathered their coats. The old man at the end of the bar finished his stout with a solemn nod, sliding a crisp bill onto the wood before tipping his hat to Iris. I watched them leave, feeling a sudden, sharp pang of displacement. In my world, when the meeting ends, you pack up your laptop. When the conference is over, you clear the ballroom. The cues were absolute. The show was over, the lights were coming up, and it was time to retreat to the neutral ground of the hotel room. I acted on instinct. The muscle memory of the executive took over. I reached for my clutch, my fingers brushing the cool leather. I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with a harsh, artificial blue glare that cut through the amber warmth of the bar. 3 missed emails. A calendar reminder for an 8 a.m. breakfast briefing. The armor was trying to reassemble itself, piece by piece. I smoothed the lapel of my blazer, checking for wrinkles that weren't there. I adjusted my posture, straightening my spine against the comfortable slouch the alcohol had induced. I was preparing to transition back to Morgan the director, the woman who walked with purpose and slept in 4-hour intervals. But Iris didn't come for my glass. She didn't wipe down the counter in front of me with that universal, "time to go" gesture. Instead, she walked out from behind the bar, moving with that fluid, silent grace I had been tracking for the last hour. She crossed the room to the heavy wooden front door. I expected her to hold it open for me, to stand there as the polite gatekeeper ushering the straggler into the night. She didn't. She flipped the deadbolt. The sound was a heavy, mechanical thud that echoed in the sudden quiet. Then she reached up and clicked off the neon sign in the window. The hum of the electric buzz died instantly. She turned the sign to closed. She didn't look at me while she did it. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. The bar was no longer a public space. It was a sealed vessel, and I was still inside. She walked back toward the bar, but she didn't return to her service station. She stopped halfway, picking up a stray napkin from a table, taking her time. The silence that filled the room now was heavy, intimate. It was just the low hum of the refrigerator compressors and the sound of glass being washed in the sink behind the bar, the sounds of the machinery that kept the place alive. The jazz had stopped. The street noise was muffled by the thick oak door. It felt like we were underwater. I sat there, my hand hovering over my phone, paralyzed by the sudden shift in gravity. The rules had changed, but nobody had sent me the memo. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Should I? My voice came out rough, quieter than I intended. I cleared my throat, trying to find my boardroom projection. Do you need me to clear out? I don't want to keep you. Iris stopped wiping a glass. She looked up, her dark eyes catching the low light. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me, a long, steady assessment that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. She gave a small, non-committal shrug, one shoulder rising and falling in a slow arc. "Only if you want to go," she said. Her voice was calm, devoid of any pressure, yet the implication hung in the air like smoke. You can leave. You can go back to the emails and the empty bed and the cold air conditioning. Or you can stay. The choice was terrifying. Leaving was safe. Leaving was what Morgan the director would do. Staying was undefined. Staying was a variable I couldn't control. I didn't move. I didn't pick up my clutch. I let my hand drop away from my phone, leaving it dark on the counter. Iris watched me make the choice. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, not triumphant, just satisfied. She turned back to the shelf, bypassing the mixers and the garnishes. She reached for a bottle of high-end bourbon, the kind you don't put in cocktails, the kind you drink when you want to taste the wood and the thyme. She took down 2 heavy rocks glasses. Clink, clink, she poured, 2 fingers in each. Neat. No ice to dilute it, no water to soften the edge. Then she did the thing that dismantled the last of my defenses. She didn't slide the glass across the bar to me. She picked up both glasses and walked around the end of the counter. She was leaving her fortress. She was crossing the line between server and served, stepping into the space where the hierarchy dissolved. She walked toward the empty stool right next to mine, the wood floor creaking softly under her boots. The air felt charged, thick enough to choke on. The physical barrier of the bar was gone. She was coming into my orbit, and for the first time in years, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. And God help me, I didn't want to leave. She sat down. It sounds like a small thing, a shift in coordinates, but it felt tectonic. When the bar was between us, there was a designated safe zone, a no-man's land of polished wood where money and drinks changed hands, but bodies didn't. Now, that buffer was gone. Iris settled onto the stool beside me, close enough that I could feel the radiant heat of her arm through my silk blouse. She was in my periphery, filling up the empty space I had been guarding all night. The scent of her, the sandalwood, the citrus, the faint, clean smell of gin was suddenly everywhere, overwhelming the neutral air of the room. She slid one of the glasses toward me, the heavy base scraping softly against the wood. She didn't toast. She didn't say cheers. She just took a slow, deliberate sip of her own bourbon, her eyes fixed on the rows of bottles behind the bar, as if she were reading a familiar book. "You have a tell," she said quietly. She didn't look at me when she said it. I froze, glass halfway to my lips, the bourbon vapor stinging my nose. "Excuse me?" "Your left hand," she said, finally turning to face me. Her knee brushed mine. Just a graze. I didn't pull away. When the music tracks change, you tap your ring finger against the stem of your glass. 3 times, like you're counting down a timer. And you check your watch every time the compressor on the fridge kicks on. You're constantly calibrating how much time you have left before you have to be someone else. I looked down at my hand. It was resting on the bar, still now, but she was right. I had been doing it all night, counting the seconds, metering out my existence in billable increments. "I didn't realize I was that obvious," I said, a flush of embarrassment heating my neck. In my line of work, being readable is a liability. It means you lose the negotiation. It means you've already lost the room. "You're not obvious," Iris corrected, shifting slightly so her body angled toward mine. The movement brought her face closer, and I could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. "You're just loud. Your stress is screaming, Morgan. It's drowning out everything else in the room." I should have felt exposed. I should have felt dissected, analyzed, and found wanting. That's how it feels in the boardroom when someone finds a hole in your projection. But this didn't feel like an attack. It felt like an unburdening. For the first time in 5 days, maybe 5 years, someone wasn't looking at the title on my business card. She was looking at the exhaustion underneath it. She wasn't asking me for a solution. She was acknowledging the cost of providing them. "It's the job," I murmured, taking a long sip of the bourbon. It burned pleasantly, a fire to match the one starting in my chest. "Control is expensive." "I know," Iris said. The weight in her voice made me look up. I used to pay the same rent. I studied her profile. The sharp nose, the strong jaw, the way her hands rested easily on the bar, scarred from ice and citrus rinds. "You?" "Corporate law," she said, a dry smile touching her lips. 5 years, 80-hour weeks. I lived in the skyline too. I had the suits, I had the watch, I had the ulcer. She swirled her drink, watching the amber liquid coat the glass. I spent all day arguing about abstract concepts, liability, risk, intellectual property. Nothing was real. At the end of the day, I had nothing to show for it but a headache and a bigger bank balance I didn't have time to spend. So you left? It seemed impossible. The gravity of that world is immense. Escaping velocity is rare. I walked out, she said simply. I wanted to do something where the result was tangible. Here, I make a drink. You drink it, you feel better. The transaction is honest. The outcome is immediate. There's no committee meeting about whether the lemon twist was Q3 compliant. She laughed, a low, throaty sound that vibrated in the small space between us. I found myself smiling back, a genuine smile that cracked the plaster of my professional mask. I envy that, I admitted. The confession hung in the air. The honesty of it. You don't have to envy it, she said softly. You can just borrow it for a while. We fell into silence. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers trying to find a topic. It was the comfortable, heavy silence of two people who have recognized the same frequency in each other. I looked around the empty bar. The shadows were long, stretching across the floorboards. In my mind, I saw my hotel room, the pristine white duvet, the generic abstract art, the blinking light of the room phone. It felt cold. It felt dead. Then I looked at Iris. I looked at the way her shirt sleeve was rolled up, exposing the strong line of her forearm. I looked at the way she held her glass, loose and easy. I felt the warmth of her leg next to mine, a steady, grounding presence. I didn't want to go back to the cold. I realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity that I would rather sit on this hard wooden stool for the rest of the night than lie in that expensive bed alone. Iris set her glass down. She turned fully toward me, her expression unreadable but intense. The air shifted again, thickening, the static charge sparking into something kinetic. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She reached out. Her hand didn't land on my arm or my shoulder. It went straight to the source of the pain I hadn't even admitted I was feeling. Her fingers, cool from the glass but warming instantly against my skin, slid up the back of my neck. They found the heavy, calcified knot of tension right at the base of my skull, the place where I stored every unmade decision, every withheld scream, and every quarter point of margin I'd worried over for the last decade. It wasn't a tentative touch. It wasn't the polite, hovering contact of a stranger testing the waters. It was firm, possessive. It was the touch of a craftsman who understands the material they are working with and knows exactly where the stress points are. I froze. My entire nervous system, wired for defense and perimeter control, screamed at me to pull back. Do not engage, maintain distance, protect the asset. But my body betrayed the executive logic instantly. Instead of leaning away, I found myself leaning back, just a fraction of an inch, into the pressure of her palm. This, she murmured, her voice vibrating close to my ear, dropping an octave into something that sounded dangerously like a command, is a disaster. She didn't wait for me to agree. Her fingers moved with practiced dexterity, locating the first steel pin holding my hair in that severe architectural twist I wore like a helmet. She pulled it. The metal sliding against my scalp was a sharp, distinct sensation, followed immediately by a rush of relief so profound it made my breath hitch. One pin, then another. She was dismantling the fortress, piece by piece. There is something intoxicating about being handled by someone who knows exactly what they are doing. In my life, I am the handler. I maneuver the clients. I steer the ship. I am the one with the steady hands who calms the room. To have those roles reversed felt like vertigo. I felt the calluses on her fingertips, rough, real, evidence of labor and ice and citrus rinds, grazing the sensitive skin behind my ear. It was a texture I wasn't used to. My world is smooth glass, polished steel, and high thread count lies. Her hands were wood and grain and truth. You hold everything right here, she said softly. Her thumb dug into the muscle, a slow, deliberate circle that hurt in the way a truth hurts, sharp at first, then releasing into a dull, throbbing warmth. You're carrying the weight of the whole skyline. I closed my eyes. It was a terrifying concession. Closing my eyes meant I couldn't assess the threat level. It meant I was blind to the room, to the exits, to her expression. But the visual data was overwhelming anyway. I shut it out, and suddenly, the world narrowed down to just the physical reality of her touch. The smell of sandalwood and gin became the only atmosphere I could breathe. The sound of her steady breathing was the only clock that mattered. With my eyes closed, the sensation was amplified. I felt the weight of my hair finally falling loose, cascading over my shoulders, shielding my neck but exposing my face. I felt the heat of her body radiating next to mine, a solid wall of warmth that invited me to rest against it. The armor was gone. The suit was just fabric now. The title was just words. I was just a body, exhausted and vibrating, being held together by a bartender in a quiet room. I don't know how to stop, I whispered. The confession scraped my throat. It was the most honest thing I had said in years. I know, Iris replied. Her hand moved from my neck to cup my jaw, her thumb brushing the line of my cheekbone. She wasn't forcing me to look at her. She was guiding me. She was steadying me. That's why you need someone else to hit the brakes for you. She traced the line of my jaw with a reverence that felt almost holy, yet entirely grounded in the physical want of the moment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with stress and everything to do with the woman sitting inches away. I felt stripped down, raw, and terrifyingly seen, and for the first time, I didn't want to cover up. I wanted her to see more. She pulled back just slightly, her hand lingering on my face, the loss of full contact leaving a cold spot on my skin. I opened my eyes. She was looking at me, her pupils blown wide in the dim light, searching my face for the answer to a question she hadn't asked yet. The air between us was no longer just charged. It was volatile, waiting for a spark. Stay? The word hung in the air between us, suspended in the amber light. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was an invitation, simple and terrifyingly open-ended. It was a single syllable that threatened to derail the entire meticulously engineered trajectory of my week. My brain, conditioned by years of risk assessment and rigid scheduling, immediately tried to fire up the defense protocols. The internal calendar flashed behind my eyes like a warning light. Flight UA 492 departs at 2:15 p.m. Breakfast briefing with the VP of Operations at 8 a.m. The packing, the checkout time, the emails I hadn't sent. I opened my mouth to recite the list. I prepared to say, I can't, to explain the logistics of my existence, to retreat to the safety of the hotel room where the sheets were cold and the boundaries were clear. But the words turned to ash in my throat, because looking at her, at the way her hand still rested near my face, at the calm, patient certainty in her dark eyes, the schedule didn't just feel important anymore. It felt like a prison sentence I had been serving voluntarily. The thought of walking out that heavy wooden door, hailing a cab, and returning to the silence of the Hyatt felt physically impossible. It felt like walking back into a cage after someone had already shown me the sky. I have a flight, I whispered, but the objection sounded hollow, even to me. It was a paper shield against a flamethrower. There are other flights, Iris said. She didn't move her hand. She didn't try to argue the logic. She just dismantled the urgency. And the world will probably keep spinning if you miss a breakfast meeting. It's not that simple, I said, though I was starting to realize that maybe, for tonight, it was. It is, she countered softly. Her thumb brushed my cheekbone again, a tactile reminder of the here and now. You're exhausted, Morgan. You're vibrating with it. You don't want to go back there. You want to be here, with me. She wasn't begging. That was the thing that unmoored me. If she had begged, the power dynamic would have shifted back to me. I would have been the one granting a favor. But she wasn't begging. She was offering. She was offering me a space where I didn't have to be the director. She was offering me a few hours where I didn't have to drive. "Stay," she said again. "Not for the drink. For this. For the quiet." The fight went out of me all at once. It was a physical sensation, like a high-tension cable finally snapping. The exhaustion I'd been holding back flooded in, but it wasn't painful anymore. It was permission. "Okay," I breathed. "Okay? Yes. Okay." A slow smile spread across her face. Not triumphant, just warm. She stood up, her movements fluid and sure, and extended her hand. I took it. Her grip was solid, calloused, and incredibly grounding. She didn't lead me toward the front door. She led me behind the bar, past the gleaming rows of bottles, past the station where she worked, and through a narrow door I hadn't even noticed in the shadows. "It's just upstairs," she murmured over her shoulder. "The commute is terrible." We climbed a narrow flight of wooden stairs that creaked with every step. The air changed as we ascended. The sharp, complex scent of the bar, bitters, citrus, polished oak, faded, replaced by something softer. Laundry detergent, old paper. The faint, earthy smell of coffee grounds. It was the smell of a home. She unlocked the door at the top of the landing and pushed it open. We stepped inside. It wasn't a hotel room. It was a living space. It was small, dimly lit by the streetlights filtering through sheer curtains, and terrifyingly real. Bookshelves lined one wall, overflowing with paperbacks that had clearly been read and reread. A throw blanket was draped haphazardly over a velvet armchair. A stack of vinyl records leaned against a turntable. It was a space that had nothing to do with efficiency and everything to do with comfort. "Shoes," she said, kicking off her boots near the door. I looked down at my heels, the instruments of my torture. I unbuckled them, letting them drop to the floor with a clatter that sounded too loud in the quiet room. The sensation of the cool wood floor against my stockinged feet was electric. I felt shorter, smaller, and infinitely more human. The door clicked shut behind us. The sound was final. The city, the job, the schedule, it was all locked out. There was only the soft light, the smell of her apartment, and the woman standing in front of me, waiting. The amber light I woke to wasn't a surprise anymore. It was an anchor. It filtered through the curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the quiet air, a chaotic, natural ballet that the filtered, sterile air of the Hyatt would never allow. I lay there for a moment, just breathing, waiting for the panic to set in. The panic of the morning after usually arrives like clockwork. The sharp disorientation, the frantic search for bearings, the immediate regret over a lapse in judgment. But it didn't come. There was only the smell of cedar, the faint scent of old paper, and the lingering warmth of the space where Iris had been sleeping beside me. The night hadn't been about performance. There were no negotiations, no power plays, no leveraging synergies of the body. It had been a slow, deliberate dismantling of the walls I'd spent years reinforcing. I remembered the weight of her arm across my waist as we fell asleep. Not a restraint, but a tether keeping me from drifting back into the cold stratosphere of my own anxiety. I remembered the feeling of her breath against my shoulder, a steady rhythm that had finally coaxed my own racing pulse to slow down. It was the intimacy of safety, the profound relief of being held by someone who didn't want anything from me other than my presence. I sat up, the sheets pooling around my waist. The apartment was quiet, but alive. From the kitchen came the clink of ceramic and the rich, dark scent of coffee brewing. It hit me with the force of a physical blow, the domesticity of it. In my life, coffee is a utility, a bitter fuel consumed in paper cups while sprinting between gates. Here, it was a ritual. Iris was standing by the stove when I walked in, wearing soft flannel pants and a gray t-shirt that hung loose on her frame. Her hair was messy, a chaotic bun held up by sheer willpower, and she looked devastatingly real. She turned, holding two mismatched mugs, steam rising between us. "Black," she said, extending one to me. "I figured you weren't a cream and sugar kind of woman." "You figured right," I replied, my voice raspy with sleep. I took the mug. Our fingers brushed, a static spark that felt louder than any alarm clock. "Sleep?" she asked, leaning her hip against the counter, watching me over the rim of her mug. Yes, I realized, the truth settling in my chest. Actually sleep. No dreams about quarterly projections. She smiled, that slow, grounding smile that made my knees feel weak. Good. Standing there, barefoot on her cool wooden floor, wearing yesterday's wrinkled silk blouse, I felt a terrifying pull. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in this pocket of reality where time was measured in sips of coffee rather than billable hours. I felt desired, not because of my title, not because of what I could do for her career, but because she had seen the exhausted, frayed woman beneath the suit and asked her to stay anyway. But the phone in my purse buzzed. The vibration against the wood table was a summons I couldn't ignore forever. The armor was waiting on the chair. I dressed slowly. Pulling the tailored trousers back on felt different this time. The suit didn't feel like a second skin anymore. It felt like what it was, a costume. A necessary uniform for the role I played, but removable. The underwire didn't dig as deep. The heels didn't feel like stilts. They just felt like shoes. I pinned my hair back, but I left it looser, less severe. When I stood by the door, clutch in hand, Iris didn't make it a cinematic farewell. She didn't ask for promises I couldn't keep. She simply handed me a coaster. On the back, written in sharp, confident black ink, was a number. "For when the skyline gets too cold," she said. "Or if you need to remember what the ground feels like." "I will," I said, tucking it into my pocket like a talisman. I stepped out onto the street. The humidity hit me. The noise of the city rushing back in. Horns, sirens, the relentless hum of ambition. But as I hailed a cab to the airport, I realized the noise didn't grate on me the way it usually did. The knot between my shoulders was gone. I was going back to the war room, back to the decisions and the pressure. But I wasn't empty anymore. Control is a currency I have spent my entire life hoarding, believing it was the only thing that kept me safe. But I learned that true power isn't about holding on tight. It's about finding the one person strong enough to let you let go. I can still feel the ghost of her hand on my neck, a reminder that I don't have to carry it all alone. If you've ever found sanctuary in an unexpected place, tell me in the comments. And subscribe for more stories about finding the quiet in the noise.